Hi, this is a clip from the last free webinar, and in this I show how the traditional view of the cranial fluid system is shown. I also show that if this view of it were to be true, that we would all instantly die of a massive brain hemorrhage. So I show that and the anatomy and physiology behind all of that. I also show another image, which is how I see it, which is you don't get to die. It's very life affirming, and this whole area just naturally starts to open up and breathe, and the light starts flowing through it, and it's one image and one way of it working. It's just beautiful. And we do, in the webinar, we do meditations with holographic breathing to open that all up, and how it spreads out through the whole nervous system. So that is there as well, and there's a link below. You can go, you can do the webinar, or you can watch the recordings. That's below. And just to mention a couple of things about this clip, we give a new name to the cranial fluid, so it's not divided, and just call it craniostitial fluid or cranial stitial fluid, which is just a combination of the two names before. I've just since then discarded that, and we're going to get a better name than that for it. And the other thing, there was quite an intense energy behind this video. The energy that came through was really just to say it how it is on this topic, how I feel about it. So it came through quite strongly and almost like a rant in a couple of places. So it is quite intense in that way in some places. But I think I just wanted to get my point across, and that was the energy that was driving me. And it is something that I've wanted to say for 8 or 9 years now, and I haven't really known how to go about it, but this was the perfect platform to do it in a free webinar. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this clip, and I hope to see you in a webinar sometime. That'd be wonderful. Okay, here we go. So can you see the potency of calling, giving something a name? That they're not arbitrary. These words have an effect. These names have an effect. And there was no way of really creating the new paradigm as it is without actually giving it a name. Because while you're still calling it cranial fluid or interstitial fluid, you're instantaneously pulled back to that divided reality. So we had to, and you can call it your own name, but it does need a name which isn't in the old paradigm. I'm now going to carry on with my rant. If I can find the picture. Ah, there it is. Okay. So it goes down the spine, which we've found is impossible. It's cranial fluid, so it's spiritual, but it's full of oxygen, it's full of glucose, it's full of salt, all of these things that the brain and nerves needs, but it flows down past all of the nerves in the spine, up the other side, past all of the other nerves. I think in all, because there's 4 from each vertebrae, and then there's another, I think 5 vertebrae in the sacrum. I think it's something like 120 nerves it goes past, and they're all going, give us some sugar, give us some glucose, and go, no, I'm spiritual. You're not getting any sugar out of me. I don't do food, I'm spiritual. So it goes past all of those and doesn't give them any food, comes up past the the cranial nerves, big trigeminal nerve, the vagus nerve, these are big nerves. They've all come out from the central nervous system. They need oxygen, they need glucose. They say, give us some sugar. And I say, no, I'm spiritual, I don't do food. And then it goes up and it leaves through the sagittal sinus at the top of the head. Put your hand up if you know what the sagittal sinus is. Yeah? Okay. I had no idea. I would look at this picture. I mean, this was 3 years of pretty full-time training. I thought the sagittal sinus was somewhere designed for the cranial fluid to go. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It makes up 85% of the brain. The blood comes to the cerebrum, goes through its interstitial fluid, starts coming back to the heart as venous blood, and then all of the veins from the brain, from the cerebrum, go into the sagittal sinus. It's the main vein, or it's the wrong shape for a vein, but it's the main thoroughfare for all of that venous blood to go back. So again, I'm going to change the name for this thing. Rather than calling it the sagittal sinus, which nobody knows what is, I'm going to call it the major cerebral vein leaving the brain. Let me show you a picture. The arterial blood comes to the brain, and then it works out more and more into the venous capillary, more and more into the veins, and they all come to the surface of the brain. Where are we? Oops. There we go. They all come to the surface of the brain, and then they all feed into the sagittal sinus there, which goes back to the heart. Now, from what I can see, looking at the arteries that go to the choroid plexus where the cranial fluid is produced in the ventricles, to me it looks like a quarter of the blood going to the central nervous system is going to the ventricles and the choroid plexus to make the cranial fluid. And it's producing oxygen, it's producing glucose, it's producing salt, which are food for the brain and central nervous system. This food is travelling all the way around the central nervous system without touching anything as a spiritual fluid, and then is going back, piggybacking on the venous blood leaving the cerebrum. So what that means in effect is that a quarter of the blood going to the brain is not used. A lot of people don't know that by looking at the pictures, but inside we know that. This picture insinuates that a quarter of the blood going to the brain is not used. Also, this is a one-way journey. It comes in to the ventricles via the choroid plexus where it's produced, and then just comes out into the ventricles and then flows through the body. And because the cranial fluid and the interstitial fluid do not mix, that also means that the venous blood going back from the choroid plexus, from the ventricles, is not used because it's not in contact with any carbon dioxide, and it's not in contact with any neurotoxins. For the venous blood in the coryplexus to take back carbon dioxide and to take back neurotoxins, the same amount of cranial fluid that's flowing out into the ventricles, there's got to be that same amount of interstitial fluid flowing in on a continual basis and flowing across the coryplexus, because the interstitial fluid is in the brain and it's being used and it's being eaten and it's being breathed and then it's producing carbon dioxide. And the only way that the venous blood in the coryplexus is going to work is if that interstitial fluid is flowing into the ventricles as well as the cranial fluid flowing out. So I don't know exactly, but it looks like about a quarter of the blood flowing to the brain in this picture is not being used, and a quarter of the venous blood leaving the brain is leaving without any toxins and without any carbon dioxide in it. And it gets worse. As all of that cranial fluid is dumped into the major venous, major cerebral vein, that means an equal amount of venous blood from the cerebrum cannot leave through that vein. So not only is a quarter of the venous blood leaving without toxins, I don't know, and that is going to be something like 40, according to this picture, about 40 to 45% of the venous blood is leaving the brain without any carbon dioxide in it, without any toxins in it, and is taking back a shed load of oxygen and glucose and salt and food for the brain. And it gets still worse. The cerebrum is the biggest organ in the brain. It's about 85% of the whole volume of the brain. There's this strong flow of blood to the cerebrum. This all goes through the arteries down into the little capillaries that are wide enough for one blood cell. The wall around those capillaries, one cell thick, and normally it could quite happily go through there and then flow into the venous blood and flow out through the veins and back to the heart. But in the cerebrum, it can't do that, because the cranial fluid is flowing out through the major venous, whatever it's called, vein. It is blocked. So all of that pressure, this massive muscle, putting all of that pressure into the blood supply of the cerebrum, those tiny little capillaries, and it can't leave. And every one of those little capillaries in that situation, for me, I might be wrong, but for me, they would all just go pop. And everybody on this earth, not just the people or the animals or the insects or the birds, everything would die of a massive brain hemorrhage. If that picture was correct, to me, within one heartbeat, would change life on earth drastically for the worst. So now I may be wrong in that, but through sensible logic, that is what it looks like to me. That I've lost the picture again. That if you hold this picture to be correct, you're basically saying that the whole on life on earth, other than the plants and trees, is going to die in one heartbeat. Now, people may not know that intellectually, but I think people know it inside. So now there may be something wrong with how I'm seeing this, but I don't think so. Nobody so far has argued against my logic. But that is what I see happening there. Now, as an alternative to that, in holographic breathing, the ventricles breathe, and craniostitial fluid is coming out of them with oxygen, glucose, salt, and craniostitial fluid is flowing into them with carbon dioxide, with neurotoxins. It's flowing back in through the choroid plexus, which is designed to do that. The choroid plexus is designed to filter both ways. Oxygen flows out, fluid with oxygen and everything flows out, and it goes the other way. Carbon dioxide and toxins will filter the other way. It's a very clever filter. But that filter isn't used in that picture. But in craniosacral, in holographic breathing, they breathe and it goes both ways. So right from the very conception of craniostitial fluid, it is both, because it's being created by both fluid from the ventricles and fluid from within the brain. It comes out of the ventricles and it meets all of these nerves. Nerves, give us some sugar. The craniostitial fluid goes, okay, sure. And that's it, game over. Because what happens is you have this old-fashioned toilet with the cistern. It's all one fluid. It flows down with gravity and it flows towards the exits, which are the nerves. It's so simple. It's so obvious. It fits with every scientific principle. It makes sense. It makes spiritual sense. All it does is get rid of this completely divided way that's in every anatomy book, every anatomy school. One word, craniostitial fluid, one image of it working simply and easily with nature and feeding the whole body. So you have the whole brain breathing, all areas of the brain breathing. The blood supply is coming, the venous blood is leaving, there's this much cranial fluid left, and that's just slowly making its way to the nerves, carries on travelling out through the nerves, gives out from the nerves into the interstitial fluid of the body, and from there it flows into the lymph, it flows into the venous blood, comes back to the heart, flows around the body, flows to the brain, comes out, becomes the craniostitial fluid. Some of that is used, it carries light, it's an elixir, it brings life to the cranial, all the cranial cells. They breathe, they eat, they have their nourishment, they have their light. The toxins come out. Some can go back through the venous blood. The rest is just slowly breathing and migrating to the exits, which are the nerves. I see these things where they say, oh, we've found the lymph for the brain, and they describe these little tiny things that can't be seen. It has to be the size of the whole lymph system for it to work. And there's the most obvious thing, the nerves. And for some reason it said it doesn't flow down the nerves, except there's no reason to stop it. I'm ranting again. So for those who are able to stay, we're going to do another meditation. If you have to leave part of the way through, that's fine to leave. And you can choose the old image if you want. If you want to die in one heartbeat, that's fine. So I'm not stopping anyone doing that, but we will do a meditation, a visualization of how I see it. And hopefully we've given birth to a word and a new fluid tonight. Hopefully we've given birth to craniostitial fluid, or whatever name you want to give it. But hopefully this is the first webinar that I'm doing that will give birth to a name and a new reality. So you're part of something. Be interesting to look back in 10 years time and see what's happened to that name, and you'll be saying, I was there. I was there when that happened. All right, great. So closing your eyes and gently dropping into the holographic breathing.